teaching. I pretty much have taught everything. I've been the new person multiple times at different buildings. So I started off as an elementary art teacher, and then I quit that job to teach at a high school full time, and then I was let go because of reduction of faculty. And then I was at another school for 4 years where the same thing happened to me. And then I've been at my current position for the last 16. And with that, I've been able to be a part of some different hiring processes. I was actually on the hiring team for Janet here. I have had numerous student teachers, and currently I'm mentoring a first-year teacher.
All right. Animations, compliments of Janet Taylor. I'm Matt Milkowski. So this is my 11th year of teaching. I've taught at the same school in Chicago for the last 10 years. It's called Kenwood Academy High School, Chicago Public Schools. So I've also been a part of the hiring process. And I've had 5 or 6 student teachers for the last few years as well.
And last but not least, I'm Janet Taylor. And I've been teaching for 9 years. I came from a previous career of 10 prior to that. And I only teach high school. I have been in 3 different districts. I started off in one district at 2 different schools, traveling between the 2. Then taught at Chicago Public Schools with Matt, and now I teach with Janelle in Naperville. I have been part of mostly hiring processes, obviously interviewing myself, and I have mentored first-year teachers as well.
So we have, once this fish theme started, we just kind of went off the rails with it. So there's a lot of oceanic imagery. In theory, it all connects, but you can use your judgment there. So be prepared. So we're going to talk about our content in sort of 5 big chunks, plus an extra bonus round at the end. Experienced teachers here know a lot of the things that you try and do as a first-year teacher, you continue throughout your entire career. So there's a lot of overlap, but we're going to try and pump that information for you into these categories here.
And so, by kind of show of hands, how many of you guys are pre-service? Any pre-service teachers? Kind of figured it would be that way. How about early career, and then veterans? How about of the veterans who are thinking about shifting and going somewhere new? Anyone? A few. Okay.
Me?
That helps us. That helps us. We seem to have a lot of information, so we want to make sure we focus on what we really need to.
And who's burnt out?
When in doubt, add animations. That will stop your burnout. All right, so the first category is student teachers. We really find it, go ahead. Super important to talk about the experience as a whole, right? So it's not just about delivering your lesson plans, it's about the entire experience and getting as much out of it as possible. When I was changing my careers and I got my teaching certificate as a master's program, I kept asking in the classes, yeah, but what about, this sounds great, but when I'm in the class, what do I do? And they're like, there's no handbook for this. And I thought, okay, great, thanks a lot. I'm ready to get moving. So it wasn't until I was actually in the experience of student teaching that I kind of got thrown in and really understood what it was to be a teacher.
So when you're designing lessons as a student teacher, you really want to make sure that students are driving the curriculum. If the students aren't invested in it, they aren't really going to want to produce quality work. So you really want to make sure that you rely on your cooperating teacher because they pretty much understand their school, they understand the clientele. More than likely, they're going to give you a curriculum that they're going to expect you to try to follow. And when you're designing new lessons, you want to really make sure that they're focused on fitting into that already existing curriculum because once you leave, that teacher's going to have to continue teaching it, and you want to make sure that they have their students where they need to be to continue.
Okay, another thing is when you first start teaching, think about what authentic engagement may look like. I think there's often a misconception that if students are all quietly working on something that they're engaged. They might be working, but they might not be invested at all in that content or learning for that matter. And then there's sort of the reverse side of that where if you walk into a classroom, students are walking around, talking on their phones, that's not necessarily disengagement, right? They might be collaborating, they might be researching. So I think that's something, maybe when you're first observing a teacher as well to consider.
And then lastly, this is an opportunity for you to take risks and a safe environment for you to fail, right? So if you want to try something and it doesn't work, this is the time to do that, because that's going to help you understand what it looks like for success in your classroom.
So when you are working with that cooperating teacher, you guys have to have a relationship. So you really want to make sure that you understand what their teaching philosophy is, as well as, of course, your own, and be able to, once again, rely on their expertise about what the client and their population is like, what their school climate is like.
It's also important, I think we forgot to mention about this, but it's important to find the right fit for you actually going to student teach. Make sure that you're looking for a school. Don't just do it because that's what works out or that's what fits. You really want to kind of observe a couple times, get to know that teacher before you choose, in order to have that success too.
And I feel like in the last few years, this is the last part that we're going to talk about here with the cooperating teacher. In the last few years, when I've had student teachers or like first-year teachers, often when I give advice or ask why did you do something the way that you did, often it feels like there's this animosity or that they go into defensive mode. And so sometimes I feel like they might feel like it's a gotcha. Just keep in mind that they're probably not trying to treat you like they're students, but as artists and as teachers, we are constantly reevaluating how something went, and we want to be reflective on our practice.
Yeah, on a similar note, I like to tell my student teachers, a lot of the feedback, especially the cool feedback that I might provide, these are things that I'm still working on myself, right? So it can feel sort of harsh if you're getting lots of advice on maybe ways to modify your instruction. But if I had somebody observing me every single day for every moment, I would not be doing all these things constantly, right? So it's sort of like, this is advice, we have a small amount of time to work together, we're going to shoot for the ideal, but you can kind of give yourself a break, because that really never goes away for professionals.
And we do it to ourselves constantly.
Feedback?
Also keep in mind that sometimes your cooperating teacher is not from the same generation as you. So sometimes, like an example is when I was student teaching, I pretty much stayed at school till like 6, sometimes 9 o'clock at night to get everything done for the next day. Whereas now I'll have student teachers who will leave at 3:30, but they'll be working on their computers at home on their beds until midnight. And so you really need to make sure that you communicate your work process with your cooperating teacher, because they might be seeing you leaving at 3 every day and think you're lazy. So you really want to make sure that they understand how you work.
And then again, respecting the fact that you're stepping into somebody else's classroom, their relationships with their students. It's a very vulnerable place for an actual cooperating teacher to give that up, right? So just remembering that when you step in and then step out, it's still their classroom no matter what.
Okay, so we're in reflective and flexible is sort of the theme of this entire presentation. It really is important in your limited time if you're a student teaching to be as reflective as possible. And I recommend find a tangible way to collect data about your performance. So that might be sharing out after by writing or recording voice memos or debriefing with your mentor teacher. But it's really important to think about what happened. I mean, if at the end of a week, all you can say is it went pretty good, right? That's not really digging deep enough. So you have to find a way to, again, get that data and use it. Another good example is like things like exit tickets. I don't really do them myself, right? Where you ask the students a question at the end of class to see if they've attained content for the day. You can look at that, and that can directly influence how you teach the very next day. Question?
Yes, quick question. That advice that you just gave, do you think that's something that's going to be happening to them during their evaluations? Like that reflective piece, getting with data? So do you think that's a good thing for them to practice?
Yeah, it's probably good to explicitly state that, because we kind of do forget about talking about that piece when a student teacher becomes a teacher, that you are going to get evaluated, and your administrator who's evaluating is looking for those pieces.
Especially as a beginning teacher, because you're evaluated a lot those first few, State of Illinois is like 4 years of it. So.
Do you guys, is EdTPA a thing for many of you here? Okay. So, right. This is maybe also advice for mentor teachers. So when I'm working with a student teacher, I have a Google Doc, and sort of like for each period, there's a column that's my observations and notes and suggestions, and then there's a column for their reflection. So that works out well, because when it's time for them to put together a lot of the documentation for EdTPA, they just pull evidence from that nonstop, right? So there's like a page for every period for however many days they're there. So that could make it a little bit easier if you have a lot of writing, reflective writing. Good question.
Thank you.
You really want to be fully committed to the student teaching experience. You want to obviously put in the time it needs to do it successfully. But if you get the opportunity, you really want to mirror what your cooperating teacher does. So I have an art club. I'm going to expect you also to become the art club advisor. It's important to go to plays, go to music events, go to sports activities, go to things that your students are interested in, make a face, make sure they know you're there, but also you get to understand the climate of the school and the culture of it.
And then I know how hard it is to be a student teacher. We all do, right? And you're kind of stretched thin, but it's really important to take a moment, at least here and there, to observe other art teachers in the department, because it's really helpful to see how other teachers address their students' needs, what their climate in their classroom is. Again, I might walk into my classroom tap dancing, right? Not literally, but right, like I'm like, guys, come on. That might not be Janelle's personality, right? So she needs to kind of be able to observe other people teaching so that ultimately she figures out what's going to work for her.
And if you can get a chance, maybe you can ask an administrator to do a mock interview for you so that you get into that practice when you go to the interview. The interview.
Okay. So quick question. 2018, how many different humans were killed by sharks across the globe? Any guesses?
Any ideas? Any guesses?
That's not. Zero.
9,000.
9,000.
7.
They guessed it right.
Who got it?
I said 5.
5 is correct. Okay, so in the entire globe, only 5 confirmed cases of a human being killed by a shark. Now let's flip that. How many sharks do you think were killed by humans in 2018? 5.
You guys get it.
And it's not 9,000. Okay. So, awareness. However,
The whole point.
Where are they going?
So part of this is, the interview is also something that's seen as really scary, right? A lot of people freak out. Obviously, there's anxiety for it. But I think that is a bit of a misconception. The interview really is a dialogue, and you're trying to find out if it's the best fit. So I want to, it's an irrational fear to be afraid of sharks, and you want to try and convince yourself that it's irrational to be afraid of the interview as well. Just sad.
So we're going to give you interviewee and interviewer advice, or not advice for the interviewer, but basically what are the interviewers looking for. So as an interviewee, how should I prepare for this, and what are some tips that I can take away from during the interview process itself?
And then as the interviewer, what are they looking for in you, and what are their first impressions of you?
So, this is you, sorry.
Right, that's okay. The no-brainers, right? You're gonna hopefully get some of this information in your school, with your school, but you wanna make sure that your resume looks good. As art teachers, people care about that. So you wanna make sure that it represents you as an artist, and you really wanna make sure that, you check things like grammar and so on, and be as honest as possible. There are, the community of art teachers is actually rather small. And it is amazing how many times in the last 5 years I've looked at resumes and I've seen errors because I know someone who works at that school and I know what they wrote is untrue. So really make sure that you're honest in your resume.
Make sure you're looking the part, right? I know, again, this is the no-brainers piece. Like, you don't want to walk in with sweatpants and a sweatshirt, right? Hopefully nobody's doing that, but you want to make sure that you're, ironing your shirt and really dressing to impress, right? Doesn't mean you have to come in with a ball gown, but, people really want to know who you are.
And it's still okay to, look the way you would want to look in your classroom. It's not like you have to overdress, but you just want to make sure you're presenting yourself in the best possible way.
And then just being aware of your digital footprint, right? So we do search you, right? So when we get candidates, we typically will kind of stalk you on Facebook or other areas just to see what's going on. Social media with students is really important to know that you don't do that. And so as far as kind of just being aware of that policy, it is something that people are looking for when they're interviewing you.
So as the interviewee, you really want to make sure that you bring some knowledge. And so just like when you're a student teacher, you want to think of, like, you do want to research the community. So you want to understand what the position is, what the school climate is like, as well as the expectations of the community. You want to develop, and you want to bring developed lessons, different examples of them. So you want to show the whole process. So any worksheets, entry, exit slips, mid-process critiques, final critiques, anything that you would use to design the lesson, to develop the lesson, you'd want to include, and then make sure that you include any authentic assessments, formative or summative.
Does anybody know what that image was?
It's too.
No, don't go back. Don't go back. You can't. Oh, okay. Go back. Go back.
Okay, close your eyes, everybody. Go to
Sorry.
the
The animations get crazy.
Did anyone know what this thing is?
It's a map of the times.
Yes, it's a time. It's
Where's
from
your other
Marshall
classes?
Islands. I teach AP Art History, and it's actually in the 250 of pieces that students need to know. So basically, a navigator of the oceans, a sailor would memorize this so they understand wind currents, and they would understand where the islands are, their little beads and shells woven into it, and you would memorize it so then when you would go, you could navigate the oceans.
Cool, right?
So it's a lesson.
For bringing in student artwork, one suggestion, and you might not have like a large portfolio if you've only got a little bit of student teaching, when you're documenting work or bringing in physical pieces, I'd suggest bringing in strong examples and weak examples. That gives you an opportunity to talk about the range, an opportunity to show how maybe you would have staffed with support for the student who didn't succeed, and again, that's all part of the reflection piece. And obviously, some of your own artwork as well, whether you have as a specialist or as a generalist.
And then also make sure you're coming up with some questions to ask the team as well. It's not just the best fit for them, it's the best fit for you as well. So be prepared to ask some questions.
The last year when we interviewed for a position, one of the things that impressed me the most is there was an interviewee who asked, "This is my first one. How did I do?" And I actually really appreciated that she was being reflective and wanted that feedback.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, so I've been on 7 interviews in the past few years, and that is the one thing that every single interviewer has asked. Do you have any questions? And no matter how many times I'm asked it, I'm always stuck. What are some of the questions that you can throw back at the interviewers that have really impressed you about the candidate? What do you think are like some of the best questions to actually ask the interviewers?
I would say student-centered ones are always the best ones. Asking about the students at the school is always a good place to start.
If I may, one of really good thing to ask with that is, what kind of shows does the department do? What are the goals that you have as a district for the art department? How visible are they? What opportunities do the students get?
What expectations there are from the department?
Correct.
You know, like what are my other job roles?
You can
Those
get
kind
into
of
the
things.
nitty gritty in terms of asking about the budget as well. It's like, how much money is given towards each student?
Is it okay to ask what kind of professional development they offer?
Absolutely.
Because that shows that you're actually wanting to continue learning and not just be stagnant.
Okay, so it's not too early, you can ask that in the interview.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you gotta kind of feel out the interviewers too, and
Yeah.
how that interview is going. If you're feeling a good vibe, I think the more questions you can ask them, right?
As an admin, we're looking at that. You're looking at staying there a long time, and if we're going to be investing in you, what are we getting for our investment?
This is my husband, by the way.
You see your eyes roll.
I heard the eyes roll.
I know when I first got a job, I was curious about the vision for growth just in terms of the course offerings, and it has grown a lot since we've been there. So even if you know what courses they offer, asking is there, if there was interest, would you hire another teacher, or how do you feel about adding this course or another level? That's another opportunity.
Thank you for that great question. So taking notes, again, we had somebody interview and had a pad of paper open. You can have a computer or whatever. I would just say if it comes to digital, just let them know that that's what you're using it for, or
Especially
ask.
your phones.
Right. You're like, oh, I'm just texting my mom right now. But really, we have had demo lessons where we've had teachers come in and teach, and they've had a pad of paper, and we'll write down the kids' names and memorize the kids' names and then use that. That is very impressive to us because that's very student forward.
Also, again, we sort of touched on this. So, do you have a question?
Just the questions you want to ask them, is it weird to like bring out a sheet that you already kind of pre-written?
No.
That shows that you're prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've touched on this a little bit, but again, it really is a two-way dialogue, and that might feel awkward because it might feel like there's like a power shift there, but you really are there to determine if this is a good fit for you or not.
And then you want to really also make sure that you show what you think you can do for the school. So if you're really good at technology, you want to explain your expertise in different areas, and make sure that you seem like you are needed for the school and the community.
And also, I'd encourage like little things. You know, there's like the teacher in every department who just is like really good with tech, even if they don't teach digital content. You know, could always like fix the printer, like anything like that is also helpful to share as well.
All right, so be genuine. Like I said earlier, you don't want to put on a facade that is not you. The team really wants to know who you are. And if it's not the right fit, it's not the right fit, right? It's not a personal thing. It's just, this is what the interviewer is kind of looking at. So you need to make sure that you're being honest about your own availability and time commitment. Some schools don't need those, like we were saying, the expectations. Some departments will say, yeah, we have 1 show a year. Some will say we have 20 shows in a semester, right? You need to know, like, don't commit to something that is not going to be good for you long term. And it's also really okay to say, I don't know, if they ask you a question and you really don't know. Trying to make something up or change the subject is definitely something we see through.
Right, and I think in that scenario, it's okay to say, you know, can I think about that and do some research and get back to you in an email? Because as teachers, right, we don't tell our students that we know everything. They frequently ask us questions that we don't know, and that's essentially what we do.
Yep.
Okay. So once again, I think this is the #1 trait: flexibility and reflection. Also, again, making sure that your dialogue is framed as in a student-centered terminology. So I'll give an example. There's like a mysterious colleague whose name we'll not use, but he was involved in like a really big art show, and he always refers to it as my art show. The art show is all student work, right? So the difference between saying my students are in an art show versus it's mine, or my project, right? So always keep that in mind the way you frame accomplishments.
One thing too, as an interviewer, when I'm looking over resumes, when I'm looking over statements, and when I'm interviewing somebody, I actually tally how many times a person says I versus students.
Yeah, we actually did that last time, didn't we? Yeah.
And it's very eye-opening. So sit down with somebody, run through it, walk through it, count. That does matter. It makes a huge difference.
Your teaching philosophy is pretty important. So you may be young and not really know exactly what your teaching philosophy is yet. But if you're more experienced and have a pretty good idea, or even if you're young and you're like, yes, this is more of my fit, it's really important to have that conversation when you're going for that interview. So I personally teach at this point a choice and a tab type of style. And if I were to go to a department where they were like, nope, you have to teach it this way, and I was not, and I said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. That's not going to be a good fit for me or for them. And so it's really important that you know kind of where you stand as far as your teaching. And then ultimately, the best for the dynamic whole. So kind of what we were saying, you need to make sure that, like the interviews are looking for maybe how did you say it? Like somebody's leaving, right? Somebody might be retiring or leaving and you're filling that hole, right? And so they might be looking for some specific qualities. So it could just be like, yeah, we're looking for a digital art teacher, but it could also be, like you said, yeah, well, we know that so-and-so was really good at always organizing X, Y, and Z for us. We really need somebody who's super organized because we know that that's a weakness of our department and we need to bring that in as a holistic approach.
And then also know that often you're asked to come in maybe for a photography position, but sections change, so it's really important to highlight other areas of expertise and to be willing to learn and to grow as a teacher and as an artist, to learn in other medias and be, and make sure that that's obvious in the interview.
All right.
You might have to pick up the pace a little bit.
Yes.
Okay. You guys ready? Buckle up.
I just have a quick question about, your husband had mentioned that when you look at a resume, you read a statement. So is that a good place to, one, talk about your philosophy of teaching and list your strengths? Or would you shoot yourself in the foot if it turns
probably ask that anyway. I know our school district has a pretty elaborate pre-interview questionnaire, and I think that that's one of those major questions that they have you
And I
answer.
remember, like, I used to put it a lot in my cover letter about what I was looking for in the school that I was applying to, or what things I value. You know, I value a lot of collaboration with my peers, with my peer colleagues, and so it's kind of an important piece to talk about. Yeah. All right, so we were looking for fishnets, and we happened upon these fishnets, and we were like, don't go to those, we want those. And then also know who your lifesaver is, right? So you want to make sure you always have somebody to kind of rely on. So Janelle and I both have mentored through the same program at Naperville, and in the book that we are given is this Phases of the First Year Teacher's Attitudes Towards Teaching, right? And we realized that no matter how many years you've been teaching, it's still your first year in that job. So it killed me when I went to Naperville. They're like, you're going to have a 4-year cohort of mentorship, and I was just like, oh my gosh, you know, all these extra things. But then I realized, you know, it doesn't really matter how long I've been teaching or what I've been doing. This is a new climate and new space for me, so I need to get kind of assimilated into the environment. So then we were all talking, and we realized that this is actually more of a life cycle of a teacher. Like, depending on your class, it could be all year, or in our case, it's semesters. So pretty much you start off like super excited, and then I'm like, oh my God, I have to keep up with them. And then I'm like, oh, I'm so tired, and this is horrible. And then I come to NEA, right? And I'm like, yes, I'm excited. And then I start thinking about it, and then I'm excited again for the end of the school year. No, I'm just kidding. And I'm excited, you know, for what's to come. And so this kind of happens. And then as we were talking more, we realized this is really what's happening to our students too, right? And so we need to be really aware of that. And it's no longer the first year teachers. It's just like kind of everybody in the school system.
Teaching and learning.
Yes.
So in the classroom, keep in mind you're probably walking somewhere that has a curriculum. So make sure that you follow it as much as you can, and do the lessons that your colleagues have. They probably can give you some directives. They probably have some experience working on them. I know a lot of times we want to make things our own, but it's not important to do everything all on your own because you will burn out. So you want to make sure that you pick and choose.
And also I would say the way you deliver instruction in one class might change for the very next period, even if it's the same course, right? Veteran teachers know your first period students have a completely different energy than even your second and certainly your 8th period students. So be ready to make changes on the fly there too.
Student needs must drive the curriculum. So again, it's not about what you want for your kids, it's about what your kids' needs are.
And don't give up on a good idea. I know personally, when I develop a new lesson, I try it over and over and over again. And even within the same lesson, like when I teach it one semester to the next, I just will reteach concepts constantly to make sure that they're getting the full experience. I've seen way too many young teachers say, oh, it didn't work this time, scrap it. It didn't work.
Even veteran teachers do that.
Yeah, but if it's something that's focused on student needs and student interests, you should try it again, just do it a different way.
Again, be true to you, be genuine, especially your teaching style. So again, what works for Janelle may not work for me, may not work for Matt. So kind of taking those pieces and making sure you're being true to who you are as far as what you're delivering and how you're doing that. And then what do you value? So again, how are you going to evolve through that? It's not just a stagnant state, right? So many things happen. Our students change as they kind of come through our classrooms. Our technology changes. Everything is always changing. So how are you going to kind of keep up with that and be aware of that? So finding a mentor is really important. We at our school have learning support coaches. We have 4 of them in our school, and every one of us in the art department works with a learning support coach. And, at first the stigma was like, oh, no, I don't need to do that. Those are for bad teachers. And actually, I've been working with my learning support coach for 4 years, and I'm an excellent rating teacher. So, to me, it's because I work with her that I'm an excellent teacher, right? I can actually be reflective, and she said keeps me out of my bubble.
And I have 20 years in, so I should be pretty good at my job by now. But I just I can get better at certain aspects of my job.
I also think sometimes schools can kind of pressure you. You might have an allotted amount of sick days, and they want to make you feel bad for using those. I think mental health days are incredibly important. Many times, if you're just keeping your head above water for what's happening that day, that cycle can continue for weeks. Where if you take one day off to kind of reset, get things in order, it can make a huge difference. So don't be afraid to do
But make
those.
sure that you're being considerate of your team, because if you work in a department of many, sometimes if you take those last second and then days off, and then somebody else has to swoop in to save you or save your class or save an art show, you can get some animosity there.
Don't
When
be afraid
you
to ask.
take a mental health day, is it a day where you just completely shut out school and reset your brain, or are you using it to catch up on things you're behind on?
It depends. So it depends on you and your needs. More often than not, we're catching up on stuff, and you know what? That's what we need, and that feels good. But there are times when you just need to sit and watch Netflix and take naps all day, and that's okay too.
That's me.
I think half of mine I go into work and just hang out in the office and do stuff, which sort of feels I'm using a day for this. But it's weirdly relaxing still to be there, and students see you and you're like, I'm not here, but yeah, it depends.
And it's good to model that too for the students, right? That they should be taking those times for themselves too. Establishing boundaries are really important. We always talk about boundaries with students, right? But really also with colleagues. Sometimes colleagues are grumpy, right? To be nice, right? Can be a little toxic at times. And so sometimes it's important to set that boundary. Or in the flip side, if you have a mentee, right? Somebody needs you all the time. They may not be super aware of your time, right? So they're asking you questions all the time, and you're like, oh man, I can't get my own stuff done. So being able to say, I just can't, I would love to help you, I just can't do that right now. Or as a first year teacher saying I need to have this time for myself right now.
Yeah, we both have had common preps with our mentor, our mentee, and sometimes you're like, whoa, I still have classes myself.
Okay, cool teacher gimmicks. I think I was guilty of these early on, maybe now still to some extent. There's a teacher in the schools every day plays guitar for 5 minutes, and students might love that, but really be cautious with that type of thing. If it relates to teaching and learning, go for it. But if it's more about maybe your ego, you're nervous, you want students to like you, just kind of look out for that balance. Okay?
And prepare to be a lifelong learner. So again, you're interested in other curriculum, your curriculum shifts, now you're teaching digital art when you thought you were supposed to be teaching ceramics. Maybe taking some extra classes, brush up on your skills, be a practicing artist, enjoy, and learn from that experience.
When you're working with your new department, you really want to make sure that you do your fair share of the work. So making sure you're participating in all the art shows, coming to all of the meetings that you have, as well as making sure that I think it's in the next one. Taking on leadership opportunities whenever you do, keeping in mind that you're probably taking over for somebody who has either retired or gone to a different school. Or another profession, and so there's probably duties that the department has that they really need you to step in and take over. So you want to make sure that you're fully vested.
So be willing to ask for help, we kind of already touched on, and making sure that the timing is there, but also don't just take and take and never give back. So if I'm giving you a curriculum to follow and you want to do it, I'm always very open for that. But then if you just kind of live in your own room and don't ever discuss that with me, and there's no feedback on that, or say, hey, this worked for my students, it's at this point we're colleagues. I'm not your teacher, right? So make sure that you're actually having that two-way street.
And then of course, really make sure you have clear expectations on material usage for your students as well as your colleagues. So you want to make sure that other people understand your organizational system, or that you don't take from someone else's when they have supplies that they need to use with their students.
Alright, we're going to have to pick it up even faster. Alright, so we're just going to kind of shoot through some of
Okay.
this, okay?
So observe other teachers, especially the ones who have preps and lab classes just like you. Science teachers are great for this, just to see how they organize their space.
Get to know your custodians.
Hells
They are
yeah.
your best friends, right? They are your peers. They are not up beneath you.
Know your resources, the counselors, the social workers, the nurses, they will be your best friends.
Yeah, we are not the therapists. We're not trained in that, so make sure that you're finding those resources. Yes.
Can you put this on the app?
It will. So
Everything is.
yeah, the QR code that was up, or you can email us. We'll put it in a Google folder and share it to everyone.
And then
Look at that.
seek
Just
your
have you
professional development. And then make sure you cut yourself some slack. I heard when I was student teaching that it takes about 4 to 5 years to really feel comfortable in a position. So we know in the profession that a lot of teachers leave after 2 years. So you really want to make sure that you give yourself some slack and understand it's a growth experience throughout your career.
All right, we're getting towards the end here. We're going to talk just briefly about the Veterans Stride.
So how, you've been maybe teaching for 16 years in one school and you're moving to a new one. How are you going to be able to kind of approach that transition because you're coming with a lot of experience? And how can you take your practice to that next level?
So I know that when I was that experienced teacher, I think it's in the next one too, I was coming from a pretty needy Title I school, and then I went to Naperville, very suburban, a lot better, like a little bit higher socioeconomic class. And so it was a culture shock to understand what the needs of my students were. I thought that they would have everything and be fine, but they really had a lot of social emotional needs. So you want to keep that in mind, that it's not going to be the same between schools.
Let me say this again. A lot of repetition here, right? Student needs need to drive your curriculum. So what you did before in your other school, just like Janelle said, may not work in this environment.
Yeah, I was really concerned about getting kids to college. Now I'm getting kids to think divergently and not try to get the right answer all the time.
And then always be willing to learn. Lifelong learners, right? You need to really think about the trends in education and art education and kind of what's going on. So we see like a lot of metacognition discussions, creative process, obviously, as I mentioned, choice and tab, and what that really means and kind of how that impacts your practice. So you don't want to come in and basically say, this is what I'm going to do. So when I came to Naperville, I didn't just say, okay, I'm changing all the curriculum and I'm going to be a tab teacher and you're going to have to deal with that. I had to work with my colleagues and understand everything, and it took a long process to just kind of work through that.
I had 5 years of lessons that I developed or got from other colleagues, and so I came in thinking, oh, I've got this curriculum down, and then I come in and find that someone else does something similar in another class, and so you really need to understand the whole curriculum so you're not stepping on the toes of your new colleagues. I see, we'll try to get to the end if that's possible. We're almost there.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, I think another piece of advice is just as you might get older and start to get burnt out a little bit, it's really important that we continue to start our communication with students based on praise and cheerleading. We're both drawing teachers, and both of our students have told us that we have like the face, the look, and like we don't think we're being judgy at all, but they're like, you just walk over and they're like, oh God, like what did I do wrong, They're like, I didn't say anything yet. But so it's really important to keep pushing that positivity. Start every piece of critical advice with a compliment first.
Once again, make sure you're aware of your teaching as a whole, being reflective, identifying weaknesses, finding resources to correct those, talking to peers.
And did we mention? Be reflective, yes. See?
All right. Last topic before our bonus round is some suggestions for dealing with burnout, which new teachers, you might run into this after a month of teaching, right? So
Even student teaching, right?
Yeah.
that's right. So we're going to think about, again, some things you can do to mitigate that burnout and extend the life of your career.
Sorry, I got excited.
It's okay to grade and to prep during class time. Sometimes your students need to work and they need to be able to problem solve on their own.
And also that you're able to give them some immediate feedback, right? Like, hey, come on over here, let me tell you what's going on, instead of like having to write that up later.
Also, if you have a growing bank of lessons, don't be afraid to go back and reuse them or flip-flop them. Maybe you stagger them every other year. But it's very easy to keep wanting to do something new, but you can run out of planning time that way really fast. Also, I think getting involved with clubs is a really good way. I mean, it seems a little counterintuitive. It's like spend more time at school. But I run a board game club and a camping club where we go on like overnight camping trips. And when you see your students, in this kind of non-pressurized setting, it really can kind of rejuvenate your interest.
Or the other. You could get rid of a club if it really is burning you out.
True. Similarly, spend less time with students. So for a long time, I have a bunch of students who, like during their lunch period, are always in my room, and I enjoyed it a lot. These are some of my favorite students. But then there'd be like a random day where all of them weren't there, and I'd be like, oh, I would get so much done in that prep period. You know, I would think that I'm working, and they're just kind of talking on the side, or they're working on the artwork. But if you are getting burned out, I think giving yourself that devoted time by yourself to work really is important.
Give yourself a break.
Also think about what you can control. You know, I'm in a sticky situation. I grew our drawing program, so I teach honor students drawing 1, 2, 3, and AP drawing and art survey. And I love it, but also that's a lot of preps. So you guys have, 5+ preps as well. So if you're at a point, where you might have to like scale back a little bit or pass on a course to someone else, even though it's your baby, that can really help quite a bit.
Practice mindfulness. I do yoga every week.
Yes, she does.
Having a student teacher or mentoring also can give you a break. Obviously, it changes up the pace of your year to maybe take a week where you're just in this more observational role as opposed to instructional. I had no idea Chicago Public Schools had like a sabbatical system. I haven't done it yet, but I just found out. None of my teacher colleagues know, but apparently after 7 years, you can take like a year off and your job is protected. You can do it to travel or for to further your education. So I haven't done it, but it's something to look into, and your school might not advertise it because they don't really want that, right? Yes.
It's hard to get them.
Quick question. So I feel like I'm staying at school till like 5 or 6 at night, like every single day, and I just can't foresee not spending that time where I'll have nothing prepared for the next day. Is that more like a first year thing, or am I gonna be doing that the rest of my career?
How many years?
This is my first year.
It gets better. It does get better.
Okay.
I think it gets
But
better.
it's
But there's
interesting
times,
sometimes.
especially around art shows and whatnot, there's times where I'm there late.
Okay.
But it does get better.
Cool.
I used to stay at work till 11 o'clock at night. I leave at 3:15. So it could change.
And then do something for yourself.
I learned to have my students do some of the prep work for me, and
Correct.
that's something I didn't catch on to until my 4th and 5th year. But the older kids, they can do they can clean paint sets, they can just things that I was doing, and I was like, why am I doing this? And my first couple art shows, I would choose the artwork and I would map the artwork, and I'm like, why am I doing this? The kids, all of you choose your own work, and then I taught them how to map their own work and have the kids do whatever prep work they can.
And one last thing I tell all my first years, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. Not everything's the most important thing. Learn to let some things go. And that comes from somebody who's very obsessive compulsive. So it's a process.
And then just take time for yourself, do a weekly thing with friends or by yourself, whatever you need.
Okay, so final bonus round. These are not really big picture ideas, and I don't know if they have any educational value, but these are just some things in the class that we like to do that are just we suggest for you.
They're
So
mostly
kinda quick
mats, by the way.
teaching hacks. Okay. One, mat boards. You hold them by the side and you do that. It makes that crazy wobbly noise. Students really like that. It goes wobble, 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 wobble. I have a pot of switches. So it's like a pot of switches, buttons and switches that are just fun to play with. So it was originally for my autistic students, but now students if they're not doing anything, I give them the pot and they'll just be it's really satisfying. I don't have this, but I'm really jealous of teachers in my school that do have these nice cozy corners, one little chair, or some of them have mood lighting with lamps and Christmas lights and stuff like that. Walkie-talkies, just find a way to use them. They love them. We do this for live paintings or around the building, but you come up with the code words and all that. Just buy a set of walkie-talkies. Spray paint, whenever you can, use this. Students always love to spray paint.
With good ventilation?
Sure, ideally. Just buy them snacks. You're just buying their affection, but it really works.
Especially when they're helping you out.
Yeah, exactly.
Show you're thankful.
I put a lot of exclamation points on their names. If I read the name of the rubric, there's a bunch of exclamation points. Maybe they like that. If they have good scores, write doodle on them. So they got an A or 100, make an awesome drawing around that. On quizzes, I give extra credit if they make a joke that relates to the content. If it's good, I'm like, you might get points, you might not. So they write all these like cheesy jokes based on whatever the quiz is related to. Celebration days?
So we started doing this with AP because we felt like they were always in this mode of just work, critique. And it was never just like a positive, like, hey, look at all this amazing work I did. And so we started doing it every Wednesday, and the kids write down on a piece of paper a comment, and we were
They
always
look
like,
kinda like confetti.
dearest Matt, your artwork inspires me by whatever. And then they give that to them, and the kids are like, oh my God, and they put it on their wall. It's a very touching time.
Just to be silly, 2, 4, 6, 8. When I'm like using a ruler and I'm measuring 2, 4, 6, 8, who do you appreciate? Mrs. Miles, Mrs. Miles. They always laugh and it's so stupid.
Again, extra credit for jokes. Also, it's okay to color. You know, we would like be in a bind. There's a sub assignment, like we just give some coloring sheet, and you come back and they're like, "This is the best thing we've done all year." Like for coloring, you're like, "Come on."
It's mindful. It's mindfulness, though.
It is.
It really is.
It is. So, you know, coloring is okay. I have a colleague who, like, his bell ringer questions, if you do that, write the question to start the class. He has off-topic Tuesdays, so every Tuesday that question is something unrelated to art, just a fun question, and I just sort of like the way he frames that. Mystery box, I did this for a while, where there's just a box with a question mark and there's something in it, and like at some point it gets revealed, either at the beginning or end of class, and there's sort of guessing games associated with that. Scavenger hunts.
Pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah. Live paintings, again, having them make artwork start to finish in the hall so that other students can see it. This could be like an established event or something that you just do periodically. Stamps, like if you do bell ringers, you know, I would grade them on this stuff and it felt like slightly arbitrary. But when I walked around with a stamp with like a different stamp for each day, like they don't even care about the grade, they're just like, oh, they want the stamp.
Or stickers.
Or stickers. And with the stamps and like whatever, if it's a fish, you can talk about fish while you're stamping them. Halloween, like I like to hide and scare them. That's pretty much it. When they come in, it's all dark and you jump out. You can have a student do it too. Slightly dangerous because they react.
And then I go to Target and you can get like 10 pencils for $1 or whatever it is. So every time I just collect a ton of those. And students on their birthday, I bring out a birthday pencil. And it was so funny because for a long time they're like, it's a birthday, but like, come on.
Can
And
I
then
add one?
if a kid doesn't get their birthday, they're like, where's my birthday pencil? I'm like, okay, I got it.
One last one, and you know these things are awesome. I'm going to steal some of these. One small thing that I did many years ago is on my rubrics and on my worksheets and all those things, I changed it from name to artist. Just on all my worksheets, artist. Who's the artist? That's you. They're like, oh, and it's just, so yeah, we'll see about that. But yeah, no, I'm just kidding.
So just wanted to leave you with a really fun animation.